it makes sense that these diseases aren't just caused by food per se. We're living, like, we've transitioned as a species from like an outdoor life to an indoor life, right? And so the converse of getting morning sunlight is avoiding artificial light at night, because that has a disruptive effect. So what I ended up doing was trying, to have my own custom pears made, and people were interested. So I just ended up doing custom pears for much broader audiences. And I was like a French fry vegetarian before that. Basically all I ate was like crap refined carbs and no really healthy foods.
Matt, you are the founder of Raw Optics, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And you are 20, 21?
I'm 20 still, yeah.
Man, you're just a baby.
Yeah, totally.
I met Matt about 5 months ago. He was here in Austin. You're kind of cruising around. I think how did we meet? We met through a mutual friend.
I think you were on Instagram and you had like posted about our glasses, and I just reached out, something like that.
Yeah, okay, maybe that was it. And then we just kind of like chatted, and I was like, dude, where are you? And you're like, I'm in Austin. I was like, what? You're in Austin? Like, let's like meet up. And you were hanging out at Barton Springs or something, and we went over to True Food, and we just like linked up and just chatted it up, and then we clicked. And I was like recently just a new affiliate with your boys and your brand, and yeah, so it was cool, man. I wanted to bring you on the channel because we are introducing more and more people to the audience here with the Carnivore brand. And the Carnivore brand is kind of like this whole thing where it's not just about the diet, but it's also about the other things that you get in your life and how you optimize. And you have a very unique and very interesting perspective and story with your line of lenses and the blue blockers you've created for people and the day blockers. And I just wanted people to get a sense. So maybe just give them like a quick backstory of where you come from and what got you into creating the business Raw Optics and the whole line of blue blockers.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, man. So I have always wanted to understand things better and do things better and be healthier and just kind of maximize my life as a human being. And so when I started having health issues as a young kid, it was the logical next step to start doing my own research, especially after I had gone through the standard conventional medical practices and it really didn't work for me. That led me to the world of paleo dieting around when I was 14 years old. I was looking into that stuff, and it made sense, just like all these grains and legumes and dairy and gluten and sugar are all damaging to the gut and damaging to the body. I was totally sold. And then when I cut out all those foods, and I was like a French fry vegetarian before that. Basically all I ate was like crap refined carbs and no really healthy foods anyway. And so it was a really bad situation, but so I naturally felt a lot better just cutting all that food out. So I was like, oh my gosh, it was almost like I had seen through the world through straws my whole life, and then all of a sudden I got a full picture. I was like, what is this? So I started looking deeper, like, okay, well, I got such a huge improvement in just a few weeks. What else is there? So I kept looking deeper, trying to like heal my autoimmune symptoms. And, I should say not necessarily autoimmune disease, but like allergies, kind of like almost celiac disease, serious gluten response in my gut. And so what I did is I removed more and more like autoimmune foods. And then eventually I was on like the GAPS diet. So I was almost carnivore before it was even like a thing. I mean, I remember reading back then about people who were like on zero carb, eating only meat and stuff. And that was like way far out back then, like super. I mean, this is like 6 years ago almost. So I didn't quite go carnivore, but I was on these, gut healing autoimmune diets. And the issue for me was that I actually like had real trouble sustaining it, like serious struggle, just sustaining the diet, getting into like a fat burning state and just feeling like satisfied from a food standpoint and feeling satiated and energetically like feeling well. And so that led me to the work of a neurosurgeon who I told you about, Dr. Kruse, who's focusing not just on food, but on our environment, our mitochondria, the cellular engines that process our food, and how that can be, how if, we're living this indoor lifestyle, our mitochondria, our engines that process food, get damaged because we're not getting the full spectrum of light that makes our body and our mitochondria work properly, and so on, so sunlight does that. And so I got into that. started applying all these protocols and then noticed like a whole new leap in my health and a greater understanding of, okay, it makes sense that these diseases aren't just caused by food per se, like we're living, like we've transitioned as a species from like an outdoor life to an indoor life. And that's a really profound change, as profound or more profound than going from eating wild natural foods to eating crappy foods. Like it's a huge shift that needs to be looked at. And when you look at how much light affects the body, it's huge. So as far as getting to the company goes, one of the pieces of the protocols that I learned about, which included watching the sunrise in the morning, spending a lot of time outdoors in the morning sun and just throughout the day, sunbathing, like you've been sending the Snapchat, sunbathing on the roof, which is awesome. Taking advantage of cold water therapy, like ET, they say, getting in cold water, like the Iceman talks about. Various little things like this all improve mitochondrial function, especially the circadian rhythm, though, which is our biologic clock. And that's driven by exposure to light, natural exposure to light, right? And so the converse of getting morning sunlight is avoiding artificial light at night, because that has a disruptive effect. And so I was wearing these glasses called blue blockers that I had heard about, but they were like some ugly safety goggle type things at the time. So what I ended up doing was trying, to have my own custom pairs made, and people were interested. So I just ended up doing custom pairs for much broader audiences, for friends, community. And then eventually we just started offering our own frame styles instead of just having people send their own frames. And that's what the business has morphed into. And now we're just kind of taking it up and up, refining the lens technology, improving our frame options so everyone has a stylish fit to choose from. And it's honestly, it's gone really well. It's going really well. I always had high ambitions, so I wouldn't say it's exceeding my expectations per se, but it is definitely meeting my expectations.
Yeah,
So
man,
pretty
that's
cool.
super dope. What real quick, backing up a minute, like you said, back when you were like 13, 14, you had some health problems. What were like some of those issues you were dealing with?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. So when I was at that age, the biggest thing was just gastric discomfort. This is something I was embarrassed to talk about, obviously, for a long time, but or at least when I was younger, I would be. But like I would just eat and I would just have really bad gas and bloating for like a while. So if I was in like a school setting or a public setting, I would just try to like hold in my gas, and I would be all bloated and uncomfortable, and I had irregular bowel movements, stuff that like obviously no one should have to deal with, at least in, I'd say in a natural world where we're not harming our biology. But especially being that age and like not being able to go to anyone who can really help you, after I had gone to gastroenterologist and they were like, oh, you should take Tums on a daily basis. I'm like, what is that going to do for me? Like, that's ridiculous. And that kind of thing, allergists. So I also had allergies in addition to these gut issues and gastric discomfort. I would have allergies, of super severe pollen responses and allergies. And then I would have headaches on a regular basis, just like really bad migraines by the time I was 14. Some like the allergies I had experienced since I was like 8, third grade. I remember the earliest I remember having that kind of thing. Yeah, it's just, and so it just begs the question, like, I know now that those are not natural issues, and the paleo diet kind of brought that out for me, all this talk of epigenetics, which I remember clearly Mark Sisson wrote a ton about epigenetics. And that was my first time I heard about this concept of epigenetics. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can change the way my genes are expressed and become like a super optimal human being. And I thought at the time it was just about making diet improvements in my diet. But now I know, after doing much more research, that although the diet's super relevant, the thing that modulates epigenetics is the mitochondria, the energy producers, because in order for the nuclear genome of genes to do anything, for any genetics to occur, just like every process in the body, it requires energy, a good amount of energy. And so if the mitochondria, the energy producers, are in any way faltering in their function, then the genes that are expressed are going to be different. There's good research to show that when mitochondrial energy production is downregulated or damaged in some way, the nuclear genome often is in some way actually, how can we say, hyperactive, which is something we don't want to have. Like in cells, we want to have our genes, not needing to replicate all the time. We want to be able to maintain and reuse and repair proteins and not have to always make new copies, because it's super energy expensive. And so that's something that's mitochondrially mediated and largely influenced not just by our diet, but largely by the environment we're living in, particularly the light we're exposed to. So point being of that whole deal is like those issues, I now know, or based on what the research is showing, they're mitochondrial damaged issues. People say, oh, you have allergies. Oh, it's genetic. Oh, you have gut issues. Oh, it's got to be genetic. Or headaches. Like no one even has an explanation for just bad headaches. Or it's like, oh, it's just normal, it's so weird that these things are normalized because it's not right. But in order, to really understand these, like one would have to look and say, okay, is this really genetic? And there's no real good research to show that any of these things are genetic. But when you look at the work of a guy like Dr. Douglas Wallace from Philadelphia, who's a huge researcher who I look up to, he's basically, and everyone should know this guy's name, but he's basically showing that all the diseases that we're facing are mitochondrial in origin and not genetic, like nuclear genetic. There's issues in the mitochondrial genetics, which is affected by our environment, our lifestyle. But it's just a great win for everyone in the health world, because it's clearly showing that we're not defined by our genes. It's really that we're defined by our mitochondria, our energy production and whatnot. And then the question ultimately just comes down to, okay, well then what influences the mitochondria the most? Is it our food? Is it our lifestyle, our sleep? Is it our light environment? And from my experience, it seems to be that our light environment and our sleep is probably like not probably, but seems to be clearly the biggest driver of mitochondrial function, because sleep is when we repair. That's one of the main functions, is to repair our mitochondria and our energy production, as well as all of our proteins and whatnot.
Right. Are you following a diet right now? You mentioned paleo. And I think when we met, you had a pretty good take, or at least you seemed favorable of carnivore as a diet. That was low in,
yeah.
I think you mentioned it was low in O3 water or deuterium. Sorry. It was a low deuterium.
Yeah. It's a low deuterium diet.
Water and deuterium at the time, because we were both kind of following some of what Saladino had been writing about recently.
Yeah.
Deuterium at the time. Are you so big on the deuterium and like all of that?
Honestly, it's a really good question. So I don't have as much knowledge on the subject as I would like. Light's my particular area of focus. As far as it comes to deuterium, I know quite a bit, but it feels insufficient, because I guess the best way to put it is that no one really fully understands it. Like certain researchers at UCLA, their stance, one of the main researchers in deuterium, Dr. Boros, who I'm pretty sure Paul has interviewed now, and many others have interviewed him as well. He is strictly of the stance that the less deuterium we can take in the body, the better. So he eats like a pretty much carnivore diet. He adds olive oil, but pretty much I would say a strictly ketogenic diet, very, very ketogenic, mostly focused on fats and whatnot. So he recommends minimizing deuterium consumption across all fronts. And part of the premise is that, back thousands of years ago, deuterium levels in the atmosphere and the food and the water were all lower, and they've just risen. So we have like a big threat there. And honestly, based on what him and other researchers in deuterium who I've met have spoken to me about, I wouldn't disbelieve that. I haven't seen the hard data myself. I haven't done that research, to be honest, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's truly the case. So there is a really strong argument for reducing deuterium content from diet overall. However, at the same time, something that I'm, currently trying to reconcile in my research and my experimentation is the fact that, humans have consumed plant foods for a very long time. I mean, obviously I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but before we became humans, we were herbivores primarily, as, and now, of course, that doesn't mean we should be eating that diet. I would never use that to justify, because we didn't become a human by eating grass or whatever, So, but nonetheless, like as a civilization and species, we've been eating plant foods significantly, at least for the last 10,000 years, back to ancient Greece and the societies that cultivated grain. Now, at the same time, though, I wouldn't argue that that's the healthiest way to eat. But what I would beg the question, or just ask the question, like, why is it that now these modern chronic diseases are just going through the roof? And as far as we know, for the majority of history, like Julius Caesar's warriors who conquered all of Europe, like they were beasts as far as the historical record goes. And they ate like lots of grain, you know, they ate meat still, and meat was always a preferential food as far as I understand from what I've looked into. And even Julius Caesar wrote that the German people who they interfaced with on the Rhine, in the Rhineland, when they were conquering Gaul, like modern day France, the Germans kind of were coming sometimes, but Caesar never really wanted to cross into Germany because it was just a whole new land and he didn't have the resources to try to take that over. But, and that's why, you know, French people speak a Latin language and Germans don't. It's totally different. But the point there is that the Germans, he specifically noted, and I was reading this book, it's like 2,000-year-old book that he wrote. He's like, the Germans subsist purely on milk and meat, and they're extremely tall and extremely fit. And I was like, damn. So there's definitely some historical, you know, evidence for the advantages of eating like a meat-based or a seafood or meat or animal-based diet. So, I mean, it's an interesting situation. I guess to get to your question more about deuterium, it's like people have been eating plant foods seasonally, not all year round. That's like the key thing. So maybe I would wager, you know, if you are a healthy human, which the context is that most people aren't healthy, you could tolerate a reasonable amount of carbohydrates and plant foods maybe for a season. But especially for Europeans, like half the year, we're going to be in a scarcity where we're fasting most of the time and not eating plants. So that's sort of my take on it. But in general, it seems that deuterium depletion is a very effective method, especially based on the results they've gotten with just using the water alone and not the diet on cancer. So that's sort of like in many different ways my take on the subject.
Yeah, no. I think it was more just like, I remember we were talking about it and I think both of us were kind of just exploring it. I think for the audience, it's there, a lot of people on our channel are kind of, they're interested in carnivore, they're learning about carnivore. And I think what's cool about you is you can bring this other nutrient that I actually read about in my carnivore diet book, which is all about light. And I think you're such a genius when it comes to understanding that and adding some context there. To answer your points, you know, the agricultural revolution that came around 12,000, 10,000 years ago definitely made us much more of a sustainable population exploding species. But there is a lot of arguments that we saw more dental health issues, we saw smaller bone density, we saw more kind of what we see now, disease. But then soil depletion that happened from monocropping the same crop over the soil without taking into account the whole regenerative farming process of having animals resequester and regraze their waste back onto the land is what kind of just slowly wore down the quality of the food in the actual plant foods that people were eating. So early on, the plants that we ate, the wheat, had much more of the minerals and much more of the sort of range of foods. And then as you continue to grow wheat for centuries on the same land, you deplete the soil and you get less cobalamin and other things that might come through in those crops. So
Yeah.
super interesting. And we see that in animals too, where like if we grow an animal and we monocrop the animal on the same piece of property and there's no diversity of ecosystem there, the soil gets depleted as well. So it's definitely like this unique system where you have to have rotational grazing and move animals around
Totally.
and bring that in there. Let's shift gears and let's talk about light. Let's talk about this valuable thing that you've sort of dedicated your current life to, in terms of light. So I think most people understand the value of sunlight, and it's becoming less of this sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater that the dermatologists have painted a bullseye on and said, hey, you know, any sort of ultraviolet light is carcinogenic and is going to kill you. Where at least from what I have understood and what I've learned from following Mercola, some of your blogs and what you guys have educated me on, is that the net effect of ultraviolet light and full spectrum light, let's not just call it ultraviolet, but all light, but the net effect of light in general, your risk of cancer, your risk of disease goes down when you expose yourself to all of that light. And
Yeah.
I guess for someone who's never experienced you or any of your content coming from my channel, how would you go about just giving them like a brief kind of like elevator pitch on the value of light, and like where would you start with? What's your foundational kind of, I don't know, 5 minute spiel on the importance of light and what light things you like to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy because it is so foundational. You don't have to try. I don't have to try very hard. If you just look at like the solar system, try to zoom out and zoom and look at the solar system in one's mind. There's the sun in the center, and then the planets revolving around the sun because of its gravitational, pull. So Earth is one of these planets that we're living on, obviously, that in some sense, if you zoom far in, appears to be alive, what we would call alive. And what that means is that there's things that are actively moving and carrying out processes and doing all kinds of things. Like I'm moving. Plants are also moving, even if they're fixed in place. There's tons of things inside of the plant moving, nutrients and this and that. So they're stationary, but they're moving internally and they're growing and whatnot. But in order for anything to move, there is a requirement for energy, right? And so this gets really interesting when you look at life, like plants and animals and other life, and you ask, okay, well, where is the energy coming from? And it becomes immediately obvious, and this is what everyone learns in like first grade, that the sun is what gives life to Earth. The energy from the sun shining on the earth is where the energy comes from for me to move and breathe and live and whatnot, and for other animals to, I should say plants and animals and organisms to function. So, we get energy from other sources as well. Like, for example, when I breathe, I'm taking an oxygen, and the oxygen isn't per se giving me energy, but the oxygen has a electromagnetic pull. So oxygen basically, the reason, for example, if you leave your bike chain outside and it's wet, not just wet, but just anything that's exposed to oxygen that's susceptible can rust basically. So it's just oxidation. So oxygen is highly oxidative because it's basically steals electrons from different things. And so it's just, if you imagine, anyone who's taking chemistry, there's all these atoms and molecules that make up the universe. And they are atoms and elements, I should say. And certain elements have a really strong affinity for electrons. They really pull them. They want to, so like, that's why, certain bombs work, certain chemical reactions work. Like you mix two chemicals and all of a sudden there's an explosion because certain ones just want to grab the electrons, and that creates a really big reaction. So essentially, when we eat food, we're eating a hydrogen fuel source, just like hydrogen fuel you use in a car, like gasoline, or in a jet, or when you create a fire, you're using a hydrogen-based fuel source, which is wood or newspaper or whatever you use for a fire. And so we do the same thing. Like we eat hydrogen-based fuel source in what we call food, and we react that with oxygen that we're breathing. And what that does is we basically use that in our mitochondria to make energy. But stepping back a little bit, the oxygen by itself it doesn't provide the energy. The real magic is coming from the energy stored in the chemical bonds of the hydrogen-based fuel source. And then the energy from that always comes from the sun. So if you look at like an animal you eat, the energy in its fat came from partially sunlight that it's gotten over its lifetime, but that's not really the key focus at all. It's mostly like that animal ate plants, and those plants took in sunlight through photosynthesis and used the sunlight to split H2O, the water molecule. And then what they do with H2O is they breathe in carbon. The plants breathe in the carbon dioxide that we breathe out, essentially. And then they bind those hydrogens from the water with the carbon from the carbon dioxide, and then carbon, and then the sugar, I should say the oxygen from the water and from the carbon dioxide molecule. And that makes sugar, C6H12O6. And so that's a molecule that's basically storing sunlight energy. And so plant or animal eats the plant, we eat the animal, or we just eat the plant directly. All of the energy we're getting is coming from the sun, even if it's through food. Now, the cool thing is that to get more towards the gist of the question, because obviously the focus I have is that it isn't just about eating food. We also evolved all of these billions of years getting sunlight directly onto our eyes, our skin, and so much so that actually our eyes and our skin evolved to the sunlight. Like it's kind of hard to almost conceptualize, but like we take for granted, like this is me, right? Like bum 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 bum. Like what innovated the evolution of my eye and your eyes? And you have really good lighting. My lighting is kind of off just because I don't have a window right in front of me. But your eye, you have a great eye color. Like people look at Kurt's eyes, like what caused that to evolve the way it did? Like that eye specifically evolved because of the sun, just like a plant moves its leaves to face the sun a certain way. Like our eyes, even though it's a much, much longer process, specifically evolved for the sun. And so did our skin as a protector from the outside world, but also as a way to assimilate sun. One of the more interesting things that I've come across is the idea that the reason humans lost our hair and we're the only mammal, or one of the only mammals that's primarily naked. In other words, we don't have fur all over us. I mean, you look at every single mammal: giraffes, lions, zebras, rats. The only ones that also lost their hair are dolphins and whales and seals that went back into the ocean. But we lost our hair too, as the only land mammal really to have a significant amount of skin exposed. And the theory there is that that's in order to be able to assimilate light. The humans developed this adaptation so that we could take better advantage of the energy sources in the environment. So the elevator pitch is basically light has been a crucial part of all evolutionary development. And it was the primary energy source for all of life. And as a living organism that evolved from those initial common ancestors, there's a tremendous number of biological processes, some of which we know, many of which we don't even know yet, that are driven by light and affected by light. And food was an additional energy source that allowed us to get further complexified. We could eat an animal or a plant that spent a whole season assimilating light in the plant's case, or an animal that spent a whole lifetime assimilating light and building proteins and doing all this stuff. Take that in a package and eat it in one meal and get that extra complexity, all the proteins that we don't have to use the energy to make them from scratch like a plant did essentially. And so light, we can keep eating good foods, but if we cut out the light, which is that primary energy source, we're going to compromise a lot of processes in the body that we know now range from vitamin D. Everyone knows about vitamin D production. Like, just think about it. Like, we have an essential hormone for all of our body's functions, especially immune system, speaking of coronavirus and stuff, where if you don't go in the sun, like, you're toast. You can't supplement it. All the data, or most of the data, shows that it's nowhere near as effective. So that's kind of like the overall gist.
Yeah. That's interesting. You mentioned that with the mammals and how we adapted without fur. What's the thinking there around mammals who still have fur? Did they, like, why did we lose our fur and get more exposure to capture more sunlight where other mammals don't? Is there any thinking around that?
It's a really good question. So again, it's the reason I mention it as like a theory or even more of a hypothesis is because it is really just that. In my lifetime, I would like to fund research or do research to get more serious, conclusive data. But the way I would look at it, at least, is that, we evolved fur as a way to actually protect ourselves from, well, actually, it's hard to say. I would assume to protect ourselves from excess light and in order to stay warm. I mean, the mammal ancestor that we all descend from was located in many different parts of the world. And, I actually don't even have the timelines fully set on the ultimate mammal ancestor. One thing we really do know is that when the dinosaurs went extinct, there was an ancestor of us mammals that was alive then, like 65 million years ago. And presumably they were covered in a coat of fur and they hibernated for part of the year. And then, so when mammals expanded, the ones that went to cold areas obviously would benefit from more fur to stay warm, like wolves and that kind of thing. But then the animals that live in like the Sahara, like lions, or, in Africa, lions, giraffes, zebras, you would think they would benefit from less hair. And sure enough, that's what the adaptation typically looks like. They have less on their body, but they still haven't gotten rid of all of it. So I would guess, and this is just purely speculation, that because of our changes in diet to a more seafood-based template, we were able to assimilate, we're able to integrate more of the omega-3 DHA into our cell membranes, which there's good evidence to indicate that can allow us to assimilate light better, I should say.
Yeah.
However, again, that too is like, these are certain things where, you know, when we talk about like the circadian rhythm and the biological effects of light on our sleep cycle and blue light on our sleep, like that research is so rock solid, it's unbelievable. Same when we talk about vitamin D synthesis and just the time-tested benefits of sunlight. Like there's dozens of papers on the benefits of getting sun. When we get into like the theory of the evolution, the speculation behind it, a lot of it's just speculation when we get back to that stuff. Not that it's not really fun to talk about, because it is, for me, it's almost more fun than some of the hard, cold data. But the hard, cold data is that however it evolved, humans have significantly better outcomes in their life when they are getting sun than when they're not. In other words, there's a big study that was done over a lifetime of a bunch of Swedish women that was completed in 2017, analyzing like all of the factors in their life, like everything you can imagine: diet, smoking cigarettes, exercise levels, relationships, connection, blah, 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 everything. And to see like what has the biggest impact on disease generation or health, right? And the number one factor was exposure to sunlight. Like the women who got less sunlight had consistently a higher rate of all-cause mortality, so risk of death from any disease at an earlier age, than the people who got sunlight, even on the magnitude of smoking cigarettes. In other words, that basically people who don't get sunlight and don't smoke cigarettes, well, no, let me phrase this better. Basically, that avoiding sunlight is a risk factor for health on the same magnitude as smoking cigarettes. So like if you smoke cigarettes, that's bad for you. People know that. But if you're avoiding sunlight, that is on that same magnitude as smoking cigarettes. I think it's worse to avoid sunlight because it powers so many foundational processes in the body.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of with you, man. I think I would probably be, if I had to choose and had a gun to my head, I probably would take up smoking if I had to give up sunlight, but would have to smoke versus not smoke and avoid sunlight.
No, not a doubt. I would, if I had a gun to my head and I had to make a choice, I would 100%, and this is going to sound bad, especially for people who like nicotine and cigarettes because they're very addictive, but I would certainly smoke cigarettes and take the sun rather than ditch the sun and not smoke cigarettes. If that was the choice, obviously it wouldn't be ideal, but this is just really getting down to anecdotal observations, which are still interesting nonetheless. If you look at societies like in Europe and even the Philippines and or Indonesia, places like that where people literally smoke cigarettes sometimes from when they're kids, like really young ages.
Right.
Like people have smoked cigarettes like crazy for hundreds of years, like all day long, every day for their entire life. And these people still live to like 80 or 90 years old. So it's how in God's name are they able to do that? And I believe this is sort of gets to the discussion of the carnivore diet versus other diets. Like I believe that they were just so much more ridiculously healthy, almost to the question where the discussions you and I have today, oh, I have allergies, gut issues, headaches, this, that disease, the other disease. These diseases like weren't even documented, like cancer and Alzheimer's and diabetes, obesity. Even when I asked my grandpa 75 years ago, he said they never heard of anyone who got cancer ever. 75 years ago. I mean, it's ridiculous. It was like, it's insane. And now everyone gets cancer. It's like something changed and it wasn't in the genome in 3 generations. But the point there is like, these people smoke cigarettes. Like my understanding of this based on my research is that the body has tremendously powerful natural detoxification systems, ability to regenerate and heal, where, if you don't smoke cigarettes, you're probably going to be better off because you're not putting that chronic stress on your body. But if you're in such a healthy environment and lifestyle, like back in the olden days where people are just working and living outside, it almost doesn't matter in a sense, because your body can kind of kick it off. Like just to really throw out the kind of nail in the coffin example, not that it closes the discussion, it just adds more to it, is the woman who lived the oldest of any recorded person ever, Jeanne Calment, this French woman. As far as the evidence, well, not the evidence shows, the accounts of her life, she wasn't alive that long ago. Or I shouldn't say, it wasn't that long ago. She was alive recently. She smoked cigarettes until she was 110 years old, basically. Like she stopped for the last 10 years of her life. Like that's ridiculous. And she's the oldest person ever. I'm not saying cigarettes make you live longer, but like obviously they don't, but
I mean,
riddle that,
if they get you outside of the office, they might,
That's let's not go too far, but I mean, I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but it'd be better to just take a sun break without cigarettes, of course.
Of course. No, it's funny because I was on a hunting trip 2 months ago, and I was with Kyle and Paul, Kyle Kingsbury and Paul Saladino, and we were all kind of discussing in the car ride back from West Texas how um, maybe it was all the chemicals that we now have, like the 400 different chemicals in today's cigarette, that is actually what's getting people sick. And the tobacco itself isn't necessarily the biggest player in that whole variable. So it's really interesting to think about all of that.
Well, if you put it like, I mean, yeah, we're really getting a lot into cigarettes. It's very interesting, but like, I like the conversation. When I was in Ecuador a few years ago for kind of a retreat of sorts,
Because
I was
people like indigenous people, they smoke tobacco. Like it's
exactly.
been a huge part of their heritage, and they're like you said, they're inherently healthy. But how much are they moving? How much light are they getting in their diet? How much whole food are they getting? It's like all these other factors are kind of like contributing to their robust health.
Yeah. I mean, the lungs turn over every 2 to 3 days or 48 hours, if I'm not mistaken. No, that's not quite right. The gut turns over that frequently. The lungs are turning over the cells on a very regular basis. I don't have the exact number in my head, but I could even Google it or something. But it's something like where if you're in a healthy environment, you're going to be able to repair these things. If you're smoking constantly, then it's still going to be a big stress on the body. But that was something I learned about when I learned about the circadian rhythm research and the gut and all these things. Like if your one of the things I heard that caught my attention is like, if your circadian rhythm's off, your gut's supposed to turn over every 24 to 48 hours. All of these cells in the gut, the erythrocytes. No, that's a type of blood cell. What am I thinking? The gut cells, the liners of the gut cell.
The
Totally blanking on the
epithelial.
epithelial cells. Thank you very much. Yeah, these turn over on a regular basis, and if we have a disrupted circadian rhythm, where like this guy, Dr. Cruci, posed the question: if your circadian rhythm is disrupted and the gut cells turn over faster than any other cell in the body, where might you expect to see the effects of that circadian disruption first and foremost? And again, if the gut cells are the ones turning over the quickest, you might expect to see that effect of disruption in the gut cells for fastest. And so it kind of, in that context, it begins to make a lot of sense why so many people have such bad gut issues in the society today. Like we're all trying to pin it on grains and stuff, but it's like people, I mean, again, you could always make a case like, well, they had bad gut issues in ancient Rome, Julius Caesar soldiers, and it was just ignored. But I would bet, because even just looking back a couple generations to my grandparents and from what I've spoken with them, the prevalence of digestive issues and like what they experienced themselves and whatnot, like just wasn't a thing. People just ate food and they didn't eat too much and they didn't eat too little. Usually, if they had enough, they ate enough and they were just pretty healthy. Like my grandparents are in their mid 80s and they're still kicking and they're crushing it. Like, and they've eaten grains and bread their whole life. And I mean, sure, it could maybe have been healthier. They could have been better off, but it's like, today, I truly believe it'd be very amazing if anyone living in this environment today, like in our generation, is going to make it to even 85 years old, like at all, honestly.
Yeah.
Much less healthy as my grandparents currently are, so.
I think if they get light, if they respect their sleep and they do like a carnivore diet from a high quality regenerative farm, they're going to definitely stack the card in their favor. The deck is going to be really stacked.
Yeah.
Matt, tell me about Raw Optics. Like you guys have obviously evolved the lens technology. So for people on the call that are kind of tuning in, why would someone wear blue blockers and day blockers? What's the deal there?
It's a great question. Yeah. So basically, as far as the whole discussion of sunlight, which, we've got a little bit into, we did say this earlier on, like the converse of getting good morning sunlight exposure to set the circadian rhythm, which the circadian rhythm is just a term for like all of these, as bodily processes that are in a kind of 24-hour rhythm, obviously following the day and night cycle. Otherwise it wouldn't be 24 hours, and so it's like certain times a day we have melatonin secretion because that makes us tired and go to sleep. Obviously that's at one part of the circadian rhythm, one part of the day. And other points of the day, early in the morning, we have a little spike in cortisol because that wakes us up and gets us going when the light's coming out. And then we have, during the sleep, we have more human growth hormone secretion, prolactin secretion. Later in the afternoon, We have increased muscle synthesis and repair, just because that's kind of how the body's set to work. These are just things that have been researched and shown many, many times over. So the cool thing is that whole circadian rhythm is set by light. They've discovered light receptors in the eye that speak directly to the main timekeepers in the brain. So just by getting out in natural light in the morning, and artificial light doesn't have the effect because the wavelengths, the frequencies, the light composition is not what nature, let's say, has designed or given us that sets our circadian rhythm, or really what the circadian rhythm evolved to.
Now, can you look through your windows, or are the windows a problem, or it depends on the window?
The windows are a problem. Yeah, I mean, having the light coming through the windows will still stimulate like the brain, things to kind of turn on in a certain way. But no, it's significantly inferior, because most windows, for environmental purposes, they block out infrared light, a lot of infrared light, which is a really critical component for cellular health and the circadian rhythm and stuff. Again, a lot of this is known, like Joovv light panels and red light panels, which are really great products. They're basically making up for the deficiency of red light that's caused by the indoor lifestyle. Like, if everyone lived outdoors, we wouldn't use red light panels. It wouldn't be necessary. It wouldn't even have a benefit, because we're already getting plenty of red light from the sun, where from an isolated panel, it's not going to do much for us. But if someone like lives an indoor lifestyle always, and they start using a red light panel, they're gonna be like, holy shit, whew, it's crazy. So, and so that's why it's a necessary product, because like society isn't going to shift entirely outdoors anytime soon necessarily.
Ideally, a person wants to get outside, even in a rough environment, just have their eyes see the sky.
Exactly. Like, even if it's cloudy, even if it's rainy, or if it's a sunny blue sky day, like, it's anytime you can get outside, it's great. Work outside, eat outside, sleep outside. I mean, sleeping outside is just nice, but anytime you can get outside during the day, walk, talk, have sex. I mean, anything you want to do, like, do it outside if you can. It's just a benefit to be out in the light. And so that's one consideration, how light affects the circadian rhythm in the morning, and the circadian rhythm is affected by light in the day, I should say. But at night now, if it's getting dark, we have another piece of the circadian rhythm where this darkness and absence of light stimulates or allows the brain to start secreting melatonin. It's just a natural occurrence that occurs, because of the way we've evolved and the way we're optimized. And so if you have light at night, in particular modern man-made lights, because of firelight from way back when doesn't have blue light in it, very little. It's mostly red, orange, and yellow. That's why fire has that color like orangish, because it's red, orange, and yellow wavelengths mostly, and tons of infrared, obviously. That's what all the heat is, why fire is so hot, because it's just releasing all the infrared stored in the bonds in wood or whatever you're burning.
The spectrum of light before red, and then ultraviolet.
Yes, exactly.
It's beyond the violet.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the range that we feel as heat. Like, if you feel a ton of heat, it's infrared. Now, it's interesting fun fact. If you go in the sun and you feel a ton of heat, it's actually not necessarily the infrared that makes you feel the heat in the case of the sunlight, although it is partially. But when UV light hits the skin, ultraviolet, because it has so much more, it packs much more punch per amount. Like, if you have like 1 unit of ultraviolet light versus 1 unit of infrared, the same amount, the ultraviolet is significantly stronger. It's just like X-rays. Like, X-rays are another form of electromagnetic radiation, just like light, further along the spectrum. And you get that same dose of, sunlight or red light or ultraviolet light, and you get that same dose in X-rays, that could really cause some serious cellular or, genetic damage and whatnot. But anyhow, so just in the same way X-rays are stronger than ultraviolet stronger than infrared. That's why people try to make the case that it causes cancer and so on, which we should totally touch on, and why that's not exactly accurate. But so basically, when ultraviolet hits the skin, it causes we have this whole system of our skin, in basically what we call a tan, or just our skin in general, built up to slow down the ultraviolet light and turn it into infrared so that it's no longer harmful for our body. That's why we feel like our skin gets hot when we get in the sun, because it's the ultraviolet in our body, our natural sunscreen in our tan is slowing the light down and making it into infrared, or absorbing and re-emitting it. Basically, that's how it works. So
makes sense.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So basically, if we're getting artificial light at night, to kind of close that point off, like if we're getting blue light at night, these wavelengths coming from light bulbs, screens, and whatnot, then we're disrupting the natural production and secretion of melatonin because we no longer have that same stimulus that we evolved with all this time. So it's like melatonin is hard to underemphasize or understate its importance. Like it is the absolute key repair molecule for all of our cells. And so like absolute number one antioxidant molecule in the whole body. You know, this is very clearly researched, whereas certain things we might talk about here, like I disclose, are maybe more speculative. This is like rock solid, all this stuff on circadian rhythms and how light is affecting the body. So melatonin in particular is critical, and people know that. But when you take melatonin orally, you get into a bad situation where you could potentially disrupt your body's own production naturally, which would be like really, really bad, like horrible. So I would never, ever take exogenous melatonin, except maybe if I went on a long haul flight and I wanted for like 1 or 2 nights to try to readjust my circadian rhythm quickly. But even then, it's so much more effective to just either avoid light completely or wear blue blockers, because the blue wavelengths, these receptors in the eye we talked about for the circadian rhythm, they're specifically sensitive to the blue wavelengths. Now, that isn't the only piece of the sun that has biologic effects. Ultraviolet makes vitamin D, red and infrared make the mitochondria, allow the mitochondria to make more energy. All these other colors have effects, some of which are studied and some of which have yet to be studied. But blue specifically is what sets this timing system. So when you have those blue wavelengths at night, you're going to disrupt that melatonin secretion and just lower the overall repair and quality of one's sleep. So that's where blue blockers are such a simple and affordable and easy hack, where like I put them on every night. It's such a part of my life where it's not even, I don't even think about it. It's like the sun goes down, like it's time I already know to start getting ready to go to bed because the sun's gone, you know, and I want to get up early in the morning and have gotten my 8 or 9 hours before the sun comes up the next day. Now, if I'm exposed to all the bright light around, like I'll probably still fall asleep, but my circadian rhythm's being disrupted and I now know that. Whereas if I wear these glasses, all the light is so chill because it's blocking all the blue. And so it's just like turning all the light around into candlelight. And I'm just sitting like anything I do, watching a movie, I'm out on the street, I'm at a restaurant, I'm just like, I feel so good. It's so relaxing, you know, your body just turns down.
I think I saw on your blog too, you guys did some research and you found that it's really important that the light you're looking at, not necessarily the light around you, which is why the lenses are so effective, even though the blue blockers maybe aren't like swimming goggles, like sealed to the outside of your lights. It's like, no, it's like the pupil and where you're focused. Like that's the biggest kind of like impact.
It's true. Exactly. That's really a good point you bring up. I appreciate that. So it is interesting, you know, because I was thinking in the beginning, like, why am I not wearing full wraparound? Because if there's peripheral light leak, isn't that going to affect the system? But it's like, just because you see light coming peripherally doesn't, that means that it's hitting the visual photoreceptors, but that doesn't mean that it's hitting these other photoreceptors for these non-visual systems that aren't involved with vision. So yeah, the research
nucleus in the part of the body that's like setting the clock.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And those the current, I mean, again, the research can always change and they could discover it and then we'd have to adjust and, you know, learn from that new data. But as it stands, and they've dissected many eyes, you know, animal eyes and probably human eyes of people who submitted their bodies for, you know, experimentation and so on, like the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. So we have rods, we have cones for vision. And then the third photoreceptor, which was newly discovered in the 90s, which was like a huge breakthrough because it literally basically was like everyone thought forever, basically, okay, our eyes are for seeing and that's it, right? And then they discover that there's all these effects that are mediated in the body independent of vision. Like they would do experiments on animals where they nucleate them so they can't see. There was still effects happening from light going through their eye. So when I say enucleate, it means they would cut the optic nerve going to the visual centers in the brain. But there were still these effects occurring. So, you know, eventually it became a clear like must that there is some other type of photoreceptor system in the eye and the systems in the body that are driven by light that is non-visual. And this was research done over the entire course of the 1900s and eventually culminating with like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, discovering these photoreceptors that are non-visual. And so the point there is that these cells appear to be exclusively located in the inner retina. So if you imagine the retina, it's like a circle disc sort of thing on the back, in the back portion of the eye. And so light that's hitting peripherally from top, sides, anything like that is striking the outer retina. Only the light really coming more direct is going to hit that inner retina portion where these cells are located. And so that's why, you know, the studies that are done on blue blockers that show increased melatonin secretion and whatnot are effective. You know, not these people wearing blue blockers in these studies aren't necessarily wearing like full wraparound. I know one of the companies that did this study and they're just using normal glasses, and their blue blockers were more of a clearish or slightly less blocking lens than what we offer for nighttime, significantly less. And they still had like a basically 100% increase in melatonin levels, which was like
Wow.
And so, so, you know, people can look into these studies and so on. And, but it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. In fact, we should get some of them together and like a little document.
So I know
Put it in show
we're
notes.
running tight on time. I want to kind of steer you on a few things real quick for the audience.
Let's do it.
So blue blocker lenses, what makes Raw Optics lenses unique? What about the lenses is different in the space? Because people can go there and they can look like Swanwick, they can look at Blue Blocks, and they can look at Raw Optics. I like the style and the quality of your guys' frames a lot. And I think that the lenses are unique in that they, I used to have like those Uvex $10 goggles off of Amazon, those safety welding goggles. And those were like, for $10, I tell people get those versus nothing. But you guys, if I'm correct, your lenses are patented or they're patent pending, and you block not only like all of the reds or all of the blue spectrum, but also part of the green spectrum because there's so much green light in the sun.
Yeah. So I appreciate the question. So the best way to put it is when I started Raw Optics, the main focus was how to take the lens technology that blocks the right wavelengths and put it into attractive frame styles. And that's what we're doing. And so that's what we have right now. That's our product. And it has the superior lens technology, which we can talk a little bit about. And the key is that we have really high quality frames that just feel good. They fit a variety of faces. So, you know, that it's not too hard to make a decision when you go and purchase a pair of glasses, but they're going to work. And then, so as far as the lens technology goes, yeah, as far as patents go, we don't have a patent, and there's no way really to patent. It's kind of like shoes. You can't really go ahead and patent shoes, you know, like as a concept, because it's already been used, and blue blockers too have been used. But what we are working on is towards what you just said, you know, some proprietary methods of blocking blue light that are going to be superior to what's already out there. But I mean, at present, even our current lenses are superior to what's out there. And the way that that's the case is because most of the lenses on the market just don't block the right wavelength. So they're in particular like Warby Parker and Zenni Optical, these large online glasses companies that are selling blue blockers, and they're selling more than anyone else because they just add the coating to their lenses. The issue is that people in the mass market don't necessarily want to wear a colored lens because the education hasn't gotten to that point where people understand, oh, this is necessary. You know, it's kind of like, oh, if it doesn't change anything about my life or my thing, like, you know, day to day, I'll get the blue blocking coating because like it doesn't change anything. As soon as they have a yellow or an orange lens or red lens, then all of a sudden, you know, there's social judgment, social pressure. People need to explain themselves, the whole deal, you know that. So that's why these main big companies that are selling the vast majority of blue blockers are selling clear lenses, but it's total BS because essentially the best way to think about it is if anyone wants to Google, and again, with the other links we discussed, we'll get a document like this put into the, or a picture of a spectrum of an LED put into the show notes or whatever, and something like that where people could look at this stuff. But basically, if you Google just spectral chart of an LED light, you see that the light, just like the sun, it's broken into a rainbow, except the sun is a continuous rainbow about balanced between all the colors. Whereas with an LED, there's like a huge spike of blue light and then another spike with some red and green. But it's a huge amount of blue light in the typical LED, especially screen devices that people are using today. So essentially, that main spike of blue light that's the biggest risk for people's not only circadian rhythm and sleep, but also for like actual eyesight and everything. If you're getting too much of that blue on a regular basis and not getting the red light from sun balanced, that's also going to lead to damaged eyesight, like cataracts and all these kinds of things that are also skyrocketing, macular degeneration and whatnot. So basically, these other lenses on the market, they block about up to 420 or 430 nanometers. But the thing is, this spike of blue light is located around 450 nanometers. So you could block like 100% of blue light up to 420 or 430 nanometers, which is what some of these companies' super clear lenses do. But when you get to 450 nanometers, where you actually need to be blocking the blue, because that's actually where it is, it's not blocking anything. So it's kind of like saying, oh, we block a bunch of blue light that might be present in the sun, which fundamentally, for the reasons I've explained, I disagree with the premise of blocking blue light from the sun. But then when you take it into the battlefield where you actually need to be blocking the right wavelength, it's like having a gas mask for chlorine gas when you're on the battlefield with fluorine gas. Like, it's not blocking, like, it's just a gas mask and it blocks something, but it isn't blocking what you're trying to block. That's really where our lenses come in as superior, because we're blocking the right wavelengths and we have the science behind it. And also what we're doing is working with manufacturers and experts around the world, like Dr. Kruse, like a researcher named Dr. Alexander Wunsch, who's one of the leading sunlight researchers in the whole world. He's based in Germany, working with him and his team to just continue to develop more and more superior lenses, better coating, better protection, better scratch resistance, better, basically better everything, better ability to block the blue light more precisely, and while still maximizing visual clarity and comfort, which again, when you have a night lens in particular, it's a real challenge because it's going to be like an orange or red, but still just trying to maximize every layer possible of those lenses, and all the while putting them into frames where this is where it really comes down to it. Because as long as, I'm just going to be honest, if you go ahead and buy Blue Box lenses, something like that, they're a great company too, and they have great products as well, and their lenses do block the right spectrum. So me and Andy, the guy who runs that company, we're pretty tight in some respects, and they're doing great work. But other companies like Swannies, their lenses for day are completely a ripoff, which is exactly what these clear lens companies are doing, like Warby Parker and Zenni Optical. Those are their daytime lenses. They're totally clear. Like our daytime lenses, they look clear to a certain extent, but actually when you look at them closely, they have more of a yellowesh hue that really is, yeah, it's reducing the blue light by a substantial chunk. And we're going to be even making some changes on our next round of lenses, where we're going to maybe even try to bring it up a notch.
I don't have
those are the night lenses.
These are the night ones. Yeah, I've got the
those are awesome.
Ones. And then I have a pair of Kruses here. Are these the Kruses? I think these are the Kruses.
Yeah, that's Kruse.
I have Days.
Stylish.
They're yellow. Yeah, I love them. The day ones that you're talking about that are yellow, is it 60 or 40%? They reduce the blue light, which is spiking, that is coming from all the artificial LED screens, things like that, right? And that kind of
the current ones we have are around 40. It's 42% to be precise, is the measurement of the worst spike of blue light. But again, if you're talking like average, the amount of blue light across all the blue light, it's more like 60%, but that's more of an approximation. But of the most damaging wavelengths, it's about a 40% reduction. And so those are not sufficient for protecting melatonin, and that's why we sell night lenses, but they are sufficient for reducing eye strain and headaches and eye damage. However, again, for the reasons I've sort of described to you, and we'll hook you up, but in the next couple of months, we're actually going to be releasing new day lenses that are going to be much more yellow, but they're going to be blocking more of this light. And so the reason behind that is, like, again, we're always trying to optimize and do what's going to be best for our customers. And even though many people want to, like, there's a big chunk of people who would rather have less blocking, and so that they don't have that color that's really perceptible. Like those daytime lenses you have, the color's not super perceptible in the lens. You can tell there's a little bit, but it's not like obviously bright yellow as much as the red lenses are red, right?
Yeah.
But in order to have the maximum blocking for all the other systems in the body besides just eye strain and headaches, we want to have more blocking. So I'll get you hooked up when we have those new lenses coming out as well. But as it stands, again, any of these lenses are better than nothing unless you buy one of those totally clear scam lenses. Then it's just total BS. But so anyway, so that's really important to know. And I'll just say Swannies night lenses. Again, I met the founder of Swannies actually recently, a very nice guy. But I'm not going to hold back here while we're at it. I hope I can stimulate them to improve their products. But their night lenses are not sufficient as far as the amount of blocking goes, and the quality of the frames just doesn't even compare. Like, it's the cheapest acetate. Not the cheapest, but it doesn't feel really good for me. So yeah, I don't like to down talk another company per se, but if you ask me, like, honestly, why are the products we're selling are superior? Why do they cost more as well? Because we're using much higher quality frames, and we're using lenses and much higher quality lenses with more research and development behind them. And that's sort of the key. And again, as about 6 months from now or even sooner, we're going to have a whole new sort of frame line, just different styles, just like the seasons change. You want to offer something different, but it'll be really interesting because we'll get you hooked up at that point. But for anyone in the meanwhile, also, we'll definitely set up a discount code with, or you already have your, discount code and affiliate stuff. That would be really
yeah. People can use Carnivore with a K and they can get 10% off with you guys. So
there you go.
You guys
that's a good move
for sure, man.
So that's the answer about how how our products are superior across the board, and they're only going to continue to accelerate in the superiority. And we're putting the research and development behind it to have the best product, and that's sort of the general gist. Yeah.
So for a consumer that's, again, you're very technical. I love it, and you can get really into like all the science, which is awesome.
Yeah.
For the average consumer who doesn't wear blue blockers, let me try to sum it up, and you can tell me if I'm pretty close to being on. For me, the main premise here is getting ancestrally consistent with how our ancestors experienced light post sunset, which means we really just saw for 300,000 years to a million, whatever you kind of buy into ancestrally, we just saw fire as a Homo sapien species and the spectrum of light from fire. And what your lenses do when you wear them is they really kind of cut the blue and the green spectrum out of the artificial light that we've only been exposed to the last 150, 200 years as a species.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly right.
That biologically allows our body to produce melatonin naturally, which is the most powerful antioxidant recovery hormone to give us the best quality sleep. So it's really
exactly
a high quality pair of blue blockers and develop a practice of wearing those post sunset up until bed while we're being exposed to things that are not
exactly. And to tie it back together to the whole conversation in the context of the whole discussion is that this is one of the key things that I learned about to your initial questions earlier on about how to improve mitochondrial function. It's just through healthy circadian rhythm habits and also not eating late at night. So not eating after 5 p.m., 6 latest, generally speaking, so that you can have maximal sleep quality and so on. Eating late disrupts the circadian rhythm and sleep, just like light at night does. People are familiar with that, but not familiar enough. Many people in the intermittent fasting communities always eat their last meal after 6 or 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., which is ridiculous because it just totally defeats like some of the benefits they could be having if they just ate the meal earlier or in the morning. But nonetheless, so to tie it back, blocking blue light increases melatonin, and melatonin improves the mitochondrial function because one of melatonin's key functions is to scavenge free radicals, essentially. They're generated by the mitochondria, and reduce the oxidative damage that would be happening in the mitochondria and with the mitochondrial DNA, which would lead to diminished energy production. But by having naturally higher levels of melatonin and improving that cellular function, we're going to keep those mitochondria kicking basically longer term, because they have to be turned over anyway. It's just reducing how often they have to be turned over so we can have less stress on the body essentially. So the other thing that I just want to mention is as far as the carnivore diet goes, because you had asked the question earlier, again, it's a touchy subject and I'm not an expert in the carnivore diet specifically, but I think it's, as an overall template, it's very beneficial. Obviously, I don't think anyone who's seen the effects and the benefits would debate that. Maybe some would, but probably more than I would think would debate it, even if they've seen the benefits and the effects. But nonetheless, so the thing that concerns me is people who get on a carnivore diet, like Michaela Peterson and stuff, who, by the way, seems like a really great girl. We've been working together with her related to glasses. You could see on her Instagram picture, she's wearing the same glasses you just put on in her Instagram. But yeah, look, check it out on her, cover page. She's got the same exact frame you have right there. So she's into it and it's great. And the thing is that, if someone's body's in a state where if they eat a single green bean or a sweet potato or whatever, something people have been eating for thousands of years and not having severe reactions to, and they have a severe reaction and they have arthritis again, or they have allergies again, or they have all these issues. It's like, it's so terrifying, not terrifying, but it's really not optimal, because clearly it's not the food, in my opinion, that's the problem there. It's their immune system and their gut that are super damaged, and the immune system's way overactive where it literally can't distinguish friend from foe at all. Yeah. And so to me, that's a much bigger concern than the food. I mean, of course, if you need to avoid all those foods to stay in remission, like by all means, you got to do that. But for example, like, it's not going to fix the root issues. And here's a good way to put it, and I hope this doesn't get too personal, but if looking at like Mikhaila Peterson's dad, the famous psychologist and whatnot, he, I believe, has been carnivore for a long time, still based on the public stuff they're sharing. None of this is private, still right. Hugely struggling with, dependence on physical dependence on certain painkillers because of some surgery or some issue that he had. And like, there's a serious biological issue that's happening in the system that the carnivore diet like isn't necessarily healing. It's not that it's hurting it, it's not making it worse. It seems to be helping quite a lot. Right. But yeah, that's sort of where I implore people to look and say, okay, carnivore, especially in the modern world, with the deuterium depletion effects, the benefits of cutting out foods that are, more inflammatory and have more plant toxins, is really important. And honestly, I don't go full carnivore just out of sort of preference, but would I benefit from it? There's a very good chance I would if I kind of cut out all the plant foods that I'm eating. Yeah. But I'm kind of, because I'm more an experimenter. I mean, so is many people trying this. I'm really just trying to see if I can't try to just continue to improve my mitochondrial function through this lifestyle that I've discussed, because I still have a long ways to go. When one's cells are so damaged that from age 8 on, I have these issues, like there's some serious underlying stuff that would take years to unravel. And I've only gotten to a point in the last couple of year or two, where I'm pretty confident in these things. And so I'm still really going through the motions of applying. The cool thing, honestly, for someone who's had these sicknesses growing up like me, nothing severe, but minor, I feel the benefits of this stuff, because if I don't do it, I have problems. You know what I mean? Like, if I'm in a place where I'm surrounded by, this is something we didn't talk about, like EMF, like chronic exposure to radio frequencies and stuff, like I can over time just kind of feel that I'm not as mentally sharp. Or if I'm not out in the sun, I'm not as sharp. But if I get in a cold bath or cold water, I feel like $1 million. If I'm in the sun, I feel like $1 million. So cumulatively, that'll have its benefits over time when maintained. But the point there is, for someone who's healthy, who applies these things just because they're interested in getting an edge and optimization, not necessarily staving off some health issue, when people like that apply this stuff, the results are like ridiculous. I mean, like literally people just feel so good. They report mental clarity. They report that they're just like feeling like they're on top of the world. And so it's a really powerful thing. But as far as the carnivore diet goes, just to close that off, I'd like to see a world where, in the meanwhile, while people are super sick and have these issues and reactions to foods, like people got to be carnivore, got to eat whatever they got to eat to heal and to stop rubbing the wire brush on the wound. But if the capacity of a wound to regenerate itself isn't reestablished, that's where the mitochondrial function comes in. Like, that's kind of what everyone's banking on. You cut out all the harmful foods and then your body's going to heal itself. But where is that regenerative capacity coming from? And for certain people, they're going to be really good. They'll cut out all the bad foods. They'll heal quickly. But some people like me, I cut out a lot of the bad foods, maybe not every single last plant food down to the dime, which again would be worth trying. But improving that regenerative capacity, based on my research, seems to be one of the best overall way to heal the body, and from like a full approach. And so that's where I'm focused. So,
no, that makes sense. I think in my book, I subtitled it "An Ancestral Reset to Optimal Human Health." So the idea is that I want people to do the carnivore diet, especially if they're coming from a place of pain and not feeling well. And then once they do it for, say, 60 days, like you can reintroduce foods. And not only does it, because it is really restrictive for most people, they're not gonna be able to dial it in, but it gets rid of the noise. Like if you don't have isocyanates, if you don't have polyphenols, if you don't have, all these other plant molecules like phytic acid and oxalates floating around in your system, junking you up. Now it's like your car is running on the cleanest fuel it can. And now you can go in there and you can pump gas from a different gas station and go, oh, I feel pretty good on this gas. Like I'll keep going with this, and you can use like avocados or dark chocolate or almonds and like see what kind of amounts and what foods trigger you and don't. So
yeah, I think I think it's really, it's good that people are doing this to reduce their symptoms for sure. And even to heal. But like, I like that you brought up the car analogy, because almost every podcast I do, I bring that up, and that's a good way to kind of close things off. Like if you're putting in, let's just say you're driving your car and you're putting in premium gas, but one day the car is blowing black smoke, you're asking yourself like, why is the car blowing black smoke and not accelerating? I'm putting in the premium gas. And then you open the hood and, you have a mechanic look into it and they see, oh, well, your spark plugs are worn out in the engine. It's like, oh, dang, well, no matter how much premium gas I put in, it's not going to fix the spark plug. You got to go in and fix that. And that's where this environmental thing comes in, sunlight, blue light, avoidance, circadian rhythm improvement, cold thermogenesis, ice baths, all this stuff, the whole 9 yards, minimizing EMF exposure to the extent possible and whatnot. Like that can have these longer term, I think, healings of the systems that are responsible for the function of the body. However, it takes longer and it takes a lot more change and commitment than a diet necessarily does, so both integrated together, I believe, are going to be very important for people who are going through this modern lifestyle and trying to heal themselves.
Nice. Matt, thanks so much for your time, man. What should people do if they want to get more of you? How should they learn about you and follow your stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the best way would be to go on to rawoptics.com just to see like our product, our website, anything we're putting up there, and the Instagram raw_optics. So that's a really great place.
For sure.
Yeah. So those are really good spots. And then I recommend as well, if someone wants to look at what I'm doing personally, they can go on The Light Diet on Instagram. That's what I call the stuff I'm focused on, The Light Diet. Maybe I'll put out a book or something. Podcast is something that's kind of in the cards on the shorter term. So you really kind of open up more on this information for the public. But yeah, that's probably the best place to go. And if anyone just wants to learn more, I just go on. I'm like a serial podcaster, so I just go on people's podcasts all the time. I did one with Kyle Kingsbury at On It. I did one with Ben Greenfield over the summer. I did one with Wellness Mama. I did one with the Dr. Gundry podcast, Primal Blueprint podcast. So anyone who wants to go on and just learn a little bit more about why it's really important to be outside in the sun and why the sun doesn't necessarily cause skin cancer and why it's actually beneficial and how these kind of ideas came to be. Yep. This is highly recommended for people to just go check them out, and you'll learn a lot.
It's so cool that you're able to kind of follow your passion, man, and be that entrepreneur. So yeah. It's good stuff.
It's a blessing, man. I'm blessed.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you coming on.
Dude, 100%. My pleasure.
I'll keep you posted. I'll follow up with you and we'll touch base here, brother.
Always, dude. Let's be in touch. Take care.
All right, Matt. Thanks.
Peace.
So if you're new to the channel, hit that like button, subscribe, comment. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, I am impressed because that was quite a conversation. But if you jumped around, that's awesome too. Again, light, super valuable. Raw Optics can give you great coverage in terms of being ancestrally consistent. Highly check them out. We'll put links in the description with all the information there. If you want to learn more about the carnivore diet, we have a download, we have a book. It's amazing. It outlines exactly what it is, why you would want to do it, how to do it, the whole transition aspect of it. Check it out. And yeah, thank you for watching. Let's get optimized.